Good morning, everyone. Appreciate you all coming in here this morning and hope you had a good day yesterday. We had a lot of good discussion. And so I'm going to, as Kim kind of framed our discussion this morning, and it's really going to focus on what the individual writer sees, what they want to know, what they're doing, and how we need to be treating the individual writers in our industry. So, you get these questions every once in a while, like, if you could pick 6 people for dinner, who would you have dinner with? Well, these are my 6 people. So you're going to get to know these, except it's breakfast.
You
and
are paying for dinner.
Yeah, you know what?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
I've got coffee out there, Tom.
Okay.
So we'll get there. So, but I want this to be like that, just a conversation. So we're going to have a conversation up here, and I want you to take advantage of the microphones there and ask these panelists any questions. Don't hesitate to come up at any point. Even if I say I'm not ready for questions, come up there and I'll call on you. So I'm going to go through and introduce each of the panelists and ask them a question just so you can get to know them a little bit about their organization and some of the things that are going on, and then we'll broaden it up and ask some more generalized questions, and that actually will be the opportunity as well for you to come up to the mic and ask questions as well. So since we have one lady on the panel, I'm going to start with her, Adelie LeGrand. And Adelie is Vice President at TransDev and Chief Strategy Officer and service to the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority. So in this role, Adelie develops strategies and actionable plans to guide the implementation of business solutions and innovations. And at RTA, she led the first strategic mobility plan for the New Orleans region, which was adopted about a year ago last December. And the plan represents the impact of shared mobility solutions on the economic growth of the New Orleans region. Now, I've seen Adelie talk about the development of the strategic plan a couple times, and I think it's been really interesting. And so, Adelie, I'd like for you to just start off and give us a couple minutes to talk about how important it was for you to really engage the community and the individual users in the New Orleans area, the riders that take your system as you develop the strategic plan.
Good morning. Thank you, Jeff, for the great introduction. And when I was preparing for this talk and really focusing on the riders and our customers, when we went through the process for the strategic plan, it was really about understanding what the community wanted. And everybody's community is unique. There's a lot of conversation we've had over the last day and a half about bike share and scooters. And, some communities, people don't know how to ride bikes. So we're talking about implementing different types of mobility tools for communities that really don't even have the skills to access and utilize those tools. So unbeknownst to us, we're creating this two-system type of community, and instead of people coming to the table being excited and happy about all these new opportunities, they feel like you're building something to exclude them from a new mobility space. So in our process of talking to folks, we were able to determine, what are your challenges? Where do you want to go? Where do you see us being able to help you do things in a different way? Some of the information that we learned was that, lighting on the streets is important. The bus stop is cool, but when I get away from the bus stop, I'm scared because it's dark and I have to walk 2 blocks to my house and I don't think it's safe. So through the process of building our strategic plan, and the slides on the screens, you see that we spoke with over 4,000 members of our community. What we did that I also thought was a little bit unique was we had, of course, outreach, but we had inreach. We also talked to our operators and our internal staff, because in a lot of cases when you build a plan, you don't talk to the people who actually work in the organization as if they're your customers, and they're also your customers. So we were able to determine from our operators, what are some of your challenges, as an operator, operating the system? What do you see out there on the streets? What do you want to see improve so that you can provide the services in a more efficient, pleasant manner? So we were able to do that as well as far as engaging internally. And I would say at the end of the process, of course, it took us a year to get it done. There's a lot of information. Our strategic plan is on the website, norta.com. You can see the plan and all of the supporting documentation. But what I'll say is in two last points is, one, when we engage the operators, because they're really on the front line, and they got to see their comments in our plan. And one of their comments specifically was, we want vehicles that don't break down all the time. That's in the plan, right? So when they showed back up at the next meeting and they saw on a big board, vehicles that don't break down, they came up to me and they're like, I can't believe you put that there. But it's about you really being a part of the process and that your input is important. And that leads into our transit asset management plan and all sorts of other things to ensure that we're preparing for replacing our vehicles in a timely manner. And the other thing is also for the community. For those people who felt like their voices weren't heard, we didn't force them to come to us. We went to them. And we went to them at bus stops. And we had simple tools to say, okay, we'll write it down, tell us what your issues are. Because at the end, we went right back to the bus stops and we shared with them what we heard. So they felt like you were serious, you didn't just come one time, you consistently come out, and we really are a part of the plan. So I would just say it's really being inclusive in a wraparound way.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. I think it's really important, just really think about, part of our discussion that we've had, and we really, in our where we are as an industry and talking about all of these new technologies and how that's really going to affect users and what they need, and we will talk about that, a little bit more this morning. But as Natalie just described, it really still is important that our agencies and our companies and organizations really understand just the basics of what our users need, so that we can actually put the right service out there on the street. So I appreciate you going through that, Natalie. I think good luck with all of that as you continue moving forward.
Thank you.
Next, I want to introduce Randy Clark, right to my right. Randy has been the president and CEO of Capital Metro in Austin, Texas since March of this year. And for those of you who don't know, for the previous 2 years, he served as vice president of operations and member services here at APTA in Washington, D.C. He was my boss. And then prior to
performance reviews.
Yeah, no, that's right. And prior to that, Randy spent 7 years in various positions with the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority in Boston, including Deputy Chief Operating Officer. So I know, Randy, that you've been at Cap Metro working on a strategic plan. I'm not sure if, I think you're getting towards the end of that as well. But what I'd like to ask you about is some of the innovative things that you're doing. Randy, as a lot of you, if you do know him, he's a big thinker. He's a visionary. And so I think, one of the things that, and Cap Metro is a growing city. And so you have to think big in a growing city like that for sure. So part of MetroLink is, I think, one of the programs where you're piloting 4 first last mile zones with a local nonprofit rideshare company. If you could tell us a little bit about that, but then also something else that I think it is more visionary is your Project Connect, that that you have something planned that I think is really kind of looking at what we can do with a lot of these connected vehicles and how that really can help our users and really get people around our city.
Yeah. Oh, Jeff, thanks for having me for dinner.
Yeah.
with the group here.
Or coffee,
good morning, everyone. So it's good to be back to the APTA family. So a couple things we're doing, and you're right, Austin, I'm lucky. Austin is maybe boomtown of America right now. I think we're like 2.5% unemployment. There's 60-story towers going up left and right. It's about 2 million people in greater Austin. By 2040, it's supposed to be 4.1 million. So it's just enormous growth. It's like 110 people a day, I think, moved to Austin or something like that. So I already have moved up the seniority list in 8 months. It's a really tech-based city, really tech-based city. And so a couple things we're doing. One is, I guess, some other people in the business are doing it as well, which is partners, first mile, last mile. Some people are doing Uber, Lyft. What we have unique in Austin is we have a rideshare, the term rideshare, which I really hate because I think we are rideshare, and I think we have allowed someone else to take our #1 brand, which is we are truly rideshare. But a quote-unquote rideshare called Ride Austin, who's a nonprofit that filled a void because the city of Austin kind of banned Uber and Lyft back in the day. There was this kind of contentious thing. So we have a partnership with them, and we call them innovation zones, and they're kind of geographically based zones that could take people from a home or business to a fixed route stop. And we're doing that very strategic because we just rebuilt our entire bus network for a launch in June, that we changed about 55% of our entire route structure to support that. So that clearly created gaps that we have to work with the community to kind of fill. And to Adelaide's point, it was very community-based. So we've used that as a link. What we're doing there is both apps are kind of covering that piece, and we want to do a lot more with Ride Austin and potentially a couple other partners that maybe even want to build almost like a public option stack of mobility, including scooters, e-bikes, and everything. Austin, and maybe because it's young, it's a college town, it's tech, scooters are all over America, but I would tell you Austin probably is the scooter capital. In August alone, there was over 300,000 scooter trips. in the month of August, 300,000 scooter trips. And that's, I need that ridership. And so how do we all partner together for that mobility? So that's one of the things we're working on. To the other point of Project Connect, that's our big kind of vision plan that we want to go towards a 2020 vote. We haven't decided fully if there's some light rail lines or some other BRT lines, but be a multi-billion-dollar push. Austin has had multiple failures in the past. This one we're feeling pretty confident that we'll go over the edge on this one. The one thing we're going to do a lot of work on, and Tom and I were actually having a good conversation about this because there's a few people in the business talking about it, is how do we maybe move bus business forward with platooned or connected vehicles? So one day we'll be in autonomous vehicle operation with buses. Who knows, as a guy I work with says, whether I'll be room temperature or not. It might be after I'm gone. But platooning buses, I think, is coming, and it's coming way faster than maybe our industry realizes. And if we do that right, we fundamentally change this business forever, because the cost structure per passenger could go down dramatically. Fleets are becoming electric, and one of the things we're going to study is what a platoon bus situation could be on an urban route. Like how could a BRT of the future kind of look? And maybe that's one operator and a second vehicle platooned, a vehicle halfway through a route. Once it hits a capacity level, we store X amount of electric kind of almost minibuses that would kind of add capacity. And you're more or less creating a train through connected electric buses, which our industry has never been able to do because the technology hasn't been there. So a lot of manufacturers and tech companies are thinking this way, and we certainly want to be on the forward-leaning process to willing to work with anyone if we have that option exists.
Great.
Yeah.
That's exciting. That's there's so many cool things that we can do and so many possibilities, and I think it's going to take some cities and some organizations to really venture out and be these pioneers and really work within the tech industry to really be able to implement and get these technologies working so that they are beneficial to us. So next to Randy is Tom Lambert. And Tom is the President and Chief Executive Officer at the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County Metro in Houston, Texas. And Tom has served in this role since 2014, and he leads a team of 4,000 employees in the management and operation of transit services for the nation's fourth largest city. Tom has been and had several positions at Metro. He's been there since 1979, and before that, he was in Austin with the Austin Police Department. So he's been a part of our industry for a long time, and I think if you know Houston well, you know that it is a very big city that has a little land use planning. I think there's people are able to be wide and far. And
we have a different approach to it.
Yes, it's
He got his boots on. You better watch
That's right.
yourself.
I have boots on today.
So I think it's what you've been able to do is you've been able to really do some things that have been very innovative. You have really took the system and for a large city did a whole redesign of your bus network that I think has proven to be really successful. And there's a lot of other innovative things that you focused on that really have been focusing on the user experience. But what I'd like to ask you about that I thought is really interesting is from a safety perspective. And I think you have a couple of projects that are really utilizing some of these technologies to really make sure that the riders are safe. And that's actually using Bluetooth technology. So you do have a small-scale project that using Bluetooth technology to on the light rail lines that are alerting pedestrians and cyclists to oncoming trains. And I think there's another one that you're also working with is helping that able and disabled people to find bus stops by using Bluetooth technology. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about that and how that's working out for you.
Well, let me say how important this industry summit is, and I'm going to use this in a couple of vantage points. One, we have a governing board that allows us to pilot and experiment with things where we're taking technology that we think has great application. It's not technology just for technology's sake. It's technology that we think we can apply to really solve a big world problem. And when you have a government board that allows you to do that and allows you to understand sometimes you may not hit the mark and you can fail, then you've got an environment of a staff willing to do that. So I always want to give credit to the board. The second thing is we recognize that bringing universities into the scheme, and I want to give Texas A&M University the Texas Transportation Institute. We created our Office of Innovation, but we went to TTI and said, look, here's our operating environment. We operate a 23-mile at-grade rail system. Our downtown blocks are 250 feet long. We have a traffic intersection at every 250 feet. Our light rail operates in the downtown area that is 150,000 employees a day. It then goes to the Texas Medical Center that has 120,000 visitors a day. So we put rail exactly where it needed to go. But when you're in that kind of operating environment, and the unfortunate reality, and I'm going to go something to what the mayor at our luncheon said yesterday. We need to get out of our lane, and we need to lead in those things that regionally impact our community. If it impacts our community, it's going to impact our system. The unfortunate reality is Houston-Harris County in the state of Texas leads the state for fatalities and serious injury accidents, whether it's automobiles, cyclist, or pedestrian. And each of those interface with our system dramatically on a day-to-day basis. And so it's also fitting that APTA's having this mid-year safety summit during this industry leadership summit, because the safety folks coming together with the governance board, with the CEOs talking about the things we can do to make things better are very important. And coming from a law enforcement background, what we've always understand is the 3 E's: engineering, education, and enforcement. So what we've done with the Bluetooth test is we're testing Bluetooth. It's a very low technology. It's not complicated. It basically, before you get to that rail platform or that intersection prior to the platform, it announces the train arrival. We've gotten very good customer feedback that people can hear it. We're looking at making sure the human factors, we change the message point so it doesn't get embodied in the urban environment so people lose it. And then we learned that that was such an effective tool. We're now applying that at 9,000 bus stops. We are a growing population, a growing region, and we're maturing. And so what we wanted to understand is what's the opportunity, not only for those that are disabled to understand how it's easier to get to a stop if you're visually impaired, but the same features can help someone that's able-bodied. So it's a project we're about to launch, actually this month. We think it has great applications to improve the customer experience, that as you go to our Trip app and you plan your trip, it will tell you, vibrating or an audible announcement, when are you getting closer to your stop when you get off the system or are going to the system. So it's applying technology that has a real-world application to improve the customer experience, to make it easier for people to use transit. And if we think if people feel comfortable and it's easier for them to use transit, more and more people will use transit. And that's what we're trying to do.
Very good. That's great. Thanks, Tom. All right, next to Tom, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. So we got to have a good mix up here. We have our leaders from some transit agencies, but then we have some from our business side as well, the ones that support our industry by developing these different technologies or providing other types of services that really help us, our industry move forward. So next to Tom is Buddy Coleman. Buddy is the Chief Customer Officer and Principal Owner of Clever Devices. Buddy is involved in all aspects of the business with the concentration in customer relations, business development, training, and marketing. In his position, Buddy is the brand ambassador for Clever Devices and a champion for public transportation in general. He's involved with various industry associations and holds positions on multiple boards, and he's been very involved in APTA, which we appreciate a lot. So Buddy, thanks and welcome. I want to talk a little bit about Clever Devices. Clever Devices develops a lot of different technologies and certainly has a large portfolio of cutting-edge solutions that really help transit agencies work a little more, a little smarter, a little more efficient, safer. And one of the areas that I think that Clever Devices focuses on is really helping agencies provide riders with information and providing actually the agencies with more information so that easier to get around if it's real-time information, if it's disruption. So I wanted to see if you could just tell us a little bit more about what Clever Devices is doing and how that type of information and these services and solutions you provide agencies really are helping the user experience at the end.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Welcome. Buddy Coleman from Clever Devices. And, You'll notice in my bio that Jeff said nothing about technology. So I run a technology company, but I'm not a technologist. However, the first 23 years of my career, I spent in the food business. I owned and operated restaurants. I owned and operated companies that sold food products. And at the end, I owned a number of franchises. So the individualization of transit is music to my ears, because in the restaurant business, in the food business, it's all about the experience. And what we're here to do is provide an experience. The difficult part is that experience changes over the years. My company is 30 years old. My dad and older brother were some of the starting members. And we are located on Long Island. My father moved our family from Queens to Long Island to Port Washington, New York, because they built a train line that ended in Port Washington. And he knew that he could move from the city to the suburbs and get back into the city in a timely fashion. So it was, it was about usability and accessibility for him, but he knew he had to move in with masses of people. I think we all know and understand that in the center of everything is still going to be mass transit. We move more people more effectively than any other mode of transportation. We do it safer, we do it quicker, we do it better than any other mode. What's happening, though, is we have the shift in generations, and we, are shifting to the me generation. It's Generation Me, not the me generation, and it's about how am I going to do things, and it's about, how do I get from here to there, and we need to tie those things together. And I think some of the things we're doing at Clever Devices to be able to do that, we do real-time passenger information and things like that, and that's great. You need the data to know where the assets are. But one of our newest innovations, if you will, is the idea of being able to act in real time in disruption management. New York, at this time of year, when it gets this cold, is famous for water main breaks. And they happen at the worst time, which is usually first thing in the morning, and they happen in the worst place, which is usually Main Street and First Avenue, right? The most heavily traveled roads there are. So what happens is you get a call, either from a driver or somebody on the street, hey, there's a water main break. The street is down. What do I do? Well, what we're able to do now through CAT AVL is make a change. The system will give you an automatic route around whatever the issue is. It'll give you the opportunity to either do it yourself or take what it is. But then what starts to happen is it starts to populate downstream. So once you decide on what the mitigation is going to be, it sends it to the driver, gives the driver turn-by-turn directions, so he's not asking the passengers, hey, okay, I know I can go down here, but how do I get back over here? It also updates the real-time passenger information with the fact that there's an issue, the bus is changing, maybe your stop is not going to be served, but here's a closer stop that's going to get you where you need to go. Tells the operator, tells the supervisors on the street what's happening, and it populates all of the reporting so that none of the reporting gets disturbed along the way. How is this important? It's critically important because when people are standing at a bus stop and the bus doesn't show up and the app tells them it's either supposed to be there or worse yet, it's there, they lose confidence, right? So we have to be fast, we have to be quick, and we have to be accurate. Going back to the fact that I believe, and I think we all believe, that mass transit is the hub and the center of everything, how do we start to add in these other factors? How do we start to add in autonomous vehicle? First and last mile, everything that our agencies are talking about. I can take an autonomous vehicle from my house to a stop, but I have to get out, if I have to get out at that stop and wait 15 minutes, I kind of, would rather take a taxi. If I know when the asset or the bus or the train or the light rail is going to be at that stop, I know approximately how long it has to take me. Or even better, if we start using our smartphone for ticketing, it knows where I'm going, it knows how I want to get there, it tells me how to get there, but it starts to calculate how long it takes to do these things, right? So it starts to do transfer connection. So the vehicle or the connecting vehicle will know, hey, I have to hold for a little bit because I have some people coming from another vehicle. All programmable, all to give a better experience to the rider, right? So these are the things that are working down and working their way through the system to help the rider experience. what we need to do, we understand we have all the data that it takes to make these decisions. We just need to integrate these systems, right? And that's kind of transformative for my company. We used to write software, and we did a lot of outreach to customers. What's your problem? Write software to fix the problem. We're starting to go a little bit beyond that. I think David Zipper talked about it yesterday, you know, the closed store, if you will. Everything on an iPhone, you have to go to the App Store. People want this stuff updated. People want to know that they're getting the latest and the greatest. People want to know that you are not directly, affecting them, but that you are keeping on top of your game so that they can have a better experience. And I think we're starting to look at the usability of some of our tools. We know we're not the professionals. We know transit is the professionals on the transit issues. And then there's definite professionals that we're hiring to work on usability. How often do you need to update these things? What's the type of information you can add on, right? If I put an autonomous vehicle, can I do one fare payment? I think these are the things that are coming. They're kind of fractioned right now, but these are the things that we're working on to figure out how to unify mass transit from moving the masses to moving the individual while still keeping the mass transit at the middle of the whole process.
Great. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I do think that, one of the keys now is just reliability. And if it's reliability, not necessarily like keeping to whatever is the schedule that you could see in some schedule board and see what the times were. That doesn't really mean as much anymore to the users because we have all of this information at our fingertips. And we just want to know where our bus is, where our train is, and when it's going to get there. And so having the technology to be able to really update and provide that real-time information to the agency, so then it gets passed on to the customer, so that we can count on that. Because as Buddy mentioned, as long as we know where we're going and when we can get there and how long it's going to take us, that's going to really help keep riders using transit and not move into some other forms that are going to add more congestion to the street. All right, so next panelist that I want to introduce you to is Herb Higginbotham. And Herb is Cambridge Systematics National Practice Lead for Transit and Shared Mobility. He brings nearly 20 years of professional experience and thought leadership in service and operations planning, capital projects, asset management, market analysis, and technology innovation. So Herb, I know that Cambridge Systematics really do a lot helping agencies design a lot of multimodal services around how customers travel around. And there's a lot of innovations that you've been working with agencies. But one in particular that I thought that I'd like to get you to focus on is really looking at data. Because obviously data is something that is really key to what we can do to really make our systems better in a lot of different ways. And especially as some systems are looking to redesign their network. And something that Cambridge Systematics have been able to do is leverage raw cell phone and fare card data to develop market responsive route services that really kind of help capture more riders. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you're collecting that data and using that?
Yeah, sure thing, Jeff. Thanks. So those of you who know Cambridge Systematics, we've been around for almost 50 years and always focused on how to bring the customer and that experience and our understanding of that to the agency to design the services around that rather than the other way around. And one of the things, or many of the things that we're trying to do lately is try to shorten that distance in our understanding, both the understanding of the customer in terms of the services that operators are providing, putting it right in your hand, understanding all the modes that you have available, but then also on the flip side, helping the operator to understand the customer and understand how they're moving about, right? And we've all had traditional means of sort of doing this in the past that, still have, a lot of applicability. All of our surveys, our onboard surveys, our, NHTS, National Household Surveys, et cetera. But some of the things that we've been doing recently to really great effect is utilizing cell phone data to actually be able to understand travel that's happening on a more profound basis than we can ever get from a survey that's just looking at a single slice of time in a week, or maybe has a sample size that doesn't capture everything that we want to know. So I'm based out in LA. We're doing some work with LA Metro, right, around this topic. And one of the things that we all know, right, is that travel patterns have grown more disparate over time, right? I can say for myself, right, I'm, night before, hon, what's the plan for tomorrow? Okay, well, the kids need a pickup, right? Someone has a soccer practice. Okay, we've got to, move in a different way maybe than we just did the day before, right? A survey might not capture that, but what we can do with these cell phone records that we've collected for 18 million users over a 6-month period is understand those patterns on a day-to-day basis. We can look at your Monday, your Tuesday, your Wednesday, and Thursday. We can understand how those trips are changing for you, and by then default then be able to help the agency design services that are more responsive to how we move, right? A lot of these are sort of borne out in what we sort of knew anecdotally, but now we have the data to be able to back up the decisions that the agency can make, right? And it helps then whenever we need to make, hard decisions about where we put service. Where do we, put our more frequent services? Where do we say, we can't afford to move into this area with a fixed route, and we have to look at something else, like an on-demand or flexible service. Some of the fun things that we learned in LA so far is that all of your riders, all of your customers are taking a lot shorter trips than we typically are good in the transit agency at providing, right? We knew a little bit about this, but now we understand specifically, time of day, day of the week, where those are occurring, right? Geographically, where those make sense more than other pieces. We took all those 18 million user trips right over the 6 months, ran them through Open Trip Planner, and looked at to say, where are we even competitive? Where is our service right now even competitive to try to serve some of those trips? And through that process now, we're able to redesign to say, okay, here are the areas where we have the density, where we have the demographics in order to support a dedicated fixed route that's fast frequent, right? And in those areas, then it becomes about, okay, well then how do we think through then the disparate nature between transit travel time and the highway travel time, right? How do we give an incentive through travel time, through bus lanes and things like that? In areas where the density or the trip patterns don't support it, okay, why are we continuing to put fixed route service that's not going to be productive? Here's an area where we can target our microtransit, target our flexible services, target our partnerships with the private TNCs, et cetera. So with all of this, it's helping us to really individualize and really surgically look at our systems rather than take a broad brush and say everybody needs the same thing everywhere.
Very good. Thanks, sir. Appreciate that. All right, last but not least, the last panelist that we have that would like to introduce you to is Marcus Wells. And Marcus leads the Siemens Intelligent Traffic Systems business in North America. And Siemens offers advanced software and systems to increase safety and improve urban and interurban mobility. And in this role, Marcus manages all functions, including sales, research and development, product management, manufacturing, customer service, and drives strategic business direction. Marcus was also named as CEO of Bytemark Incorporated, which is a leading provider for mobile ticketing, multimodal trip planning, and mobility as a service solutions. So welcome, Marcus. What I'd like to ask you is really about Siemens' vision as really building a mobility operating system for smart cities. And I think what we heard yesterday, for those who were here yesterday morning with David Zipper, talking about transit agencies and kind of two different ways to look at it. And are transit agencies asset owners? Are they just there providing, owning these different rolling stock, or are they now returning to what we call mobility providers? And something that I think Siemens technologies are able to help agencies do and is integrating all of these different mobility options that we have. If it's using a diverse fleet that you have within your organization, but also incorporating some of the other mobility options within your area, if it's bike sharing, if it's ride sharing, if it's scooters. So Marcus, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on at Siemens and put in us, the perspective, especially as mobility as a service, that we hear so much about and how that's helpful to agencies?
Sure. So thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. And I mean, if you're asking what's going on in Siemens or in our, let's say, sister companies like Bytemark, Harcon, and the likes, I mean, it's actually what is going on in the market, what is going on in the industry. This is what we do. I mean, we have heard all of, let's say, the valid and good things already. Let's try to spin it a little differently. I mean, just sharing the road safely takes on a new meaning as the future of mobility gets closer every day. It won't no longer be just the cars and buses making room for bicycles. Privately owned vehicle, more often than not, will yield to shared mobility services, and humanly driven cars in the future may more and more yield to self-driving vehicles as our cities becoming smarter. I had the struggle or the luxury, however you want to take it, in the past 15 years to live in 4 different cities in 4 different continents. And I think my travel patterns have changed completely, just which type of public transit systems are available, and also just changes about the options and choices I was able to make in this period of time. Yeah? I mean, we all know that, I mean, the mobility services has changed. We have the ride hailing, the car sharing, the bike sharing. And I think what is fairly safe to say is that they won't go away, right? Because they are giving these additional choices to riders, whether we like it or not, whether we can make sense from a cities and transportation perspective as of today. And they won't go away even though their business model today completely doesn't add up, right? So none of these companies, and these are private sector companies, not making any money, right? Which is interesting. Yeah? So but on the other hand, I mean, in the advent of self-driving vehicles, which probably fixes the biggest bug in their business model, it's certainly, I mean, we need to come up with a solution where we are able to, let's say, improve the mobility situation in cities and in urban areas by leveraging these type of technology. Because also from just a city and mobility perspective, let's say traffic is a big problem, right? And the only public transit as a strong backbone can solve those problems and can improve mobility and increase safety in cities. And one of the big challenges we have in our, let's say, transit agency, as you know better than I do, is, let's say, how to get people more access, let's say, to the transit services, and continuously increase the ridership, and how to solve those famous first mile, last mile problem. And this is, at the end of the day, why we are, let's say, focusing so much on the concept of mobility as a service, where we are, let's say, integrating a diverse fleet of publicly and privately operated vehicles into one system in order to, let's say, facilitate for the agencies and for the riders let's say, true door-to-door mobility. Theoretically, even without all of that technology or concept, even just today, in almost all cities, we could have a multimodal trip, right? Because these options are there. But so theoretically, we wouldn't need a car. I'm also living in Austin, and theoretically, I wouldn't need a car. But practically, I still do need a car in order to get around. And in many of our cities, even though there are various options, as long as, let's say, I would need to use different apps, different payment systems. If I have an uncertainty, just whether I take transit and go from a bus and then try to, let's say, switch to a car sharing mode in a spurs of a moment, it's just not, let's say, certain enough that I can do that as a traveler, right? There is always this uncertainty, how I get from A to B, from B to C, from C to D. And this is, if you would like, if you're talking about our vision and, let's say, of a mobility operating system for smart cities, which is definitely based on data-driven digital traffic and fleet management, where we are enable those true intermodal trips and the true door-to-door mobility, enable passengers not only go from A to B, but from A to C, using intelligent software to do that. And this is obviously not only a vision. I mean, one of our first, let's say, customers on that has actually been Dubai, the Road and Transport Authority in Dubai, let's say, has commissioned Siemens to integrate all the different modes, monorail, other rail options, transit, cabs, ride sharing, even bike sharing in Dubai into that one system, and feed those data into a smartphone app where people can plan their trip, book their trip, pay their trip from one application. And the reason why they did it was actually that they wanted to have their own smartphone app. They wanted to have their own outreach to the customers, get feedback of the different performance of the services, and at the same time, obviously, build a better relationship to their riders. And by the way, they get a plethora of data on where people travel, and which can significantly improve operations in the future. But this is a nice example, everything in one. I think what is probably more practical, and what, let's say, we have experienced in a lot of places in North America, is that why don't we, let's say, start, let's say, in a hybrid solution. For instance, for BART in San Francisco, we're doing a multimodal trip planning where we are, let's say, not only considering transit, but we are also adding walking, we're adding biking, we're adding individual transport, real-time traffic information, so that people can make a choice on what is the real-time situation, move from A to B with individual traffic, what are the various transit options, and then also including park and ride and bike and ride options, which we have at the stations. And then we can build trust with those additional services. The riders will get used to it, and then we can take it from there, right? And I think what is important for all these type of solutions is that on the one hand, we need to have real-time data, we need to have accurate data, we need to, let's say, update those data in a regular way to really add value to the riders, and at the end of the day, also to have these true seamless payment options. And I think if we are accomplishing that step by step or whatever, then I think we will get on top of the challenges we have, whether this is about the improving the services or whether this is just traffic in the cities, and this is what is now a core of our vision at the end of the day.
Great, thanks, Marcus. And yeah, there's so many possibilities that we have. These technologies that are really driving, so much that we do, and a lot of it, with these different apps that are being developed. And I do want to touch on that in a minute, but since we've kind of talked through and heard a little bit about from the different panelists from some different agencies, as well as what's going on with some of the services that are being provided to agencies technology-wide. But one of the things that, and I think start this with you, Adley, if I can, is when we're talking about customers and we're talking about the users of our system, one of the responsibilities that we have is to make sure that we still have access to everyone. If it's the unbanked, those with lower income, and then we're not using these technologies that might be leaving out some of these folks that are the more vulnerable riders that really need access to our services. So when you think about all these new mobility services that are available and how they're expanding, how do we ensure that everyone is able to use that, so that everyone has equal access to transit across your entire system and your network?
So that's really where, as you would say, the rubber hits the road, right? We have communities where there are some people in the community who have access to smart technology. And you've heard from the panelists, there's a whole group of people who are interested in not owning their own car and using other modes. And I think a lot of what we're talking about really works well for that group. There are another group in our communities who have no other means to travel other than public transit. And what's going on, because we have such a great, robust economy, a lot of people are moving into the city centers, which we're all aware of this too, right? It's not news. And those who depend on transit and mobility options are being pushed further away from where the core service is. So when Tom talked about they designed Houston with the light rail corridor right where the businesses were, where the people are, well, the people who depend on transit now can't afford to live in those corridors. And the challenge that we have is, in a lot of cities, and I think Herb spoke about the work that Cambridge is doing, and looking at microtransit, we're talking about providing something other than what our customer base has been familiar with, because now they're further out. So there are two issues that, at least in the New Orleans region, that we've faced. Is one, the community, when they hear microtransit or something other than a bus or a streetcar, you're giving us something that's not really as good as what everybody else has. Right? Regardless if this is a new emerging technology and a new type of tool to help you get where you need to go, you're not giving us what we used to have. And we want more buses, and we want more buses frequently. So one, I would say the challenge is educating. And what we've done in New Orleans, we're not really talking specifically about what this other type of transit is. We all in this room, because we're professionals in this space, we know it's microtransit, we know it's first, last mile. We're not using that terminology. We're talking about other mobility tools, and we're going to work together to figure out what you need and how we can get you there. So one, I would say, again, is education. Don't get hung up in the buzzwords, because in a lot of times, I don't know how else to say this, but the communities that really need the services we provide, in some cases, they're not even literate to the level of understanding words that we use every day that we think are simple, like feedback. We learned in New Orleans, we were asking people for their feedback, and they had no idea what feedback was, right? So it made us take a step back and say, do you like it or not, right? Tell us what you like. Tell us what you hate, because they understand that, right? So, and again, it's not that we're using terms to confuse people, but think about the person who has 2 jobs, they have kids, they're trying to juggle a whole lot, and you come up to them talking about feedback and microtransit. It's code word for you about to screw me, and I don't trust you people, and I'm going to make sure my community comes out to the board meeting and say that we don't like what you're doing, even though they don't realize that we're trying to do something to help them, right? So again, it's education. And then 2, it's hard, because where they're being forced to, we really can't provide them the type of service that they need, because they don't have the density. We don't have the demand. We cannot put the service out there in a way that's efficient and affordable, right? So really, in order to really solve that piece, I think it goes back to the speaker yesterday. We really have to be engaged in spaces where we have not traditionally been engaged. Land use decisions, housing decisions, all of that needs to be conversations that we're sitting at the table. We need to be members of those boards. We need to have a voice, a voting voice on all sorts of different spaces that we don't have today. Because if they continue to push lower income people further out of the city core, it's going to be harder for us to provide them with the services. And if we don't have the power of zoning, we don't have the power of affordable housing, we're always going to be running behind trying to figure out a way to fix a problem, instead of really sitting at the table and saying, this, if you don't have a community with strong mobility, you're not going to thrive. And if you need this population of people to work in your industry and they can't get there, you're not going to thrive. So how do we work together to really ensure that we are taking into consideration how people move around and not just sending them further out? The last thing I would say is that ridership is going down, not because of Uber and Lyft on its own, it's because cars are cheap. You can buy a little crappy car for a couple of bucks, and you got pushed further out, and now you're driving the crappy car to work. And then the car breaks down, and then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But then your neighbor bought a crappy car, right? So I think the whole conversation of us being transit providers, at some point in time, we all have to have a funeral. We need to have the repast and stop talking about being transit providers, really focus on mobility, not have it as a gang system of scooters against bikes, against people walking. It's about moving people. That's why we're in this room. It's about moving people. It should not be about transit. And once we stop talking about transit as a thing and start talking about mobility and us being mobility providers and managers, then we can now have a conversation of what that new space looks like. And I think that would be the last part that we need to ensure that the community understands that we're moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys get that all on video? I want that on YouTube. Well said.
It is, yeah, thank you, Adelaide. That is very well said. And I don't know, Tom or Randy, if you have anything to add from your
Well, I
perspective.
want to go back to a lot that Adelaide said, and we had this discussion yesterday. Let's don't forget the core mission of mobility. I want to go back to something she said, because I'll tell you a lesson we learned in redesigning the bus network in Houston. It's how you present it to the community. Now, our ridership is up, and I'm very proud of that. But we did we were going to go forward with an area that was very coverage area, not dense, couldn't really serve it with fixed route. And so really a more on-demand, door-to-door service. The community did not have good infrastructure, no sidewalks, open ditches. You really couldn't serve it well with a fixed route service. Well, we came out thinking we ought to come out and push what we called a flex zone. The community did not like flex zone.
Right.
And we learned a lesson that we needed to make sure we were talking to the community on how we were coming forward before we began to say what we were going to do. And I'm going to give the mayor of Houston credit today. At that time, he was not the mayor of Houston. He was a state representative. And we needed to go out in the community to try something different because we knew a standard 40-foot bus route, fixed route, would not serve this community and would be basically an opportunity cost loss. We'd be spending money and getting no value back for that. So he had worked with an advisory committee in the community and said, look, come work with this advisory. They had already worked with TxDOT on a freeway project. They had already been established. They had already built relationships and trust with each other. And he gave us an introduction to come talk to them about this service we wanted to do. The one thing we learned is we came to them and said, look, this is your service. We have the opportunity to run the service for you, but the community owns it. We allowed them to brand the service. The buses, they're actually smaller vans that serve the community, are branded with a community brand. It's called Community Connector in Acres Homes. We told them it would be door to door. Anywhere in a 5 square mile area, we would get you to school because students were having to walk in the streets because the sidewalk infrastructure did not exist. So it enhanced school safety for students going to school. Folks that need to go to dialysis treatment, we really didn't need to send our paratransit vehicle because these vehicles also a disabled person could utilize. But anywhere in that 5 square mile area, we would take them within that area, door-to-door service. But we would also connect them to the broader transportation network that they could go anywhere they wanted to go on the broader network. And based upon that experience and extremely positive feedback we got from that community, and our media people have marketed that. We've tooted our own horn because it's a good service and it's a quality service. We now are running a similar service in a community 39 years ago did not ever want bus service in their community. It's Missouri City. It's a city. It's in our service area. It's been there for 39 years, but they said emphatically we didn't want bus service in our community. They now want it. The reason they want it is because we customized it to serve the needs that were unique to that community, and we were open enough to say we're willing to try something. And it's not always about technology, although you now go to that app and you know when that bus is going to come in because you can track it on the app. But what that community also gave us the opportunity to do is not only connecting it within that 5 square mile area, we're now testing deviated service a half mile off a fixed route in that community. So I'm going to go back to what you said because you're right on target. If you engage the public and really define the problems you're trying to serve and you get really collaborative, and as the speaker yesterday said, forget the tables, forget the box, look at how you really can solve a given problem and be creative, understanding. Sometimes you might fail, but don't worry about it, particularly if you've got a board that'll support you. Be willing to do it, be willing to test it, and don't worry about failure if you're trying to be a leader in the longer term. And we've been blessed to be able to do some of those things. But Allie's right. Don't force things down on people. We have the privilege of operating the service. We don't own the service. The community owns the service. And the more we can get that appreciation, the more I think we get support from the community, all the things we're trying to do.
Did you have anything
So
to add?
I can't say anything better than what these two said. And if you can't get the bread and butter right, which I've learned in 8 months on the community and dealing with that piece, you can't get anything else right. So technology is nothing more than lipstick on a pig if you don't have the community with you and you don't have the bread and butter of transit. So like things like reliability, clean buses, talking to the customers, having your operators, if you don't do that stuff right, the tech doesn't really matter at the end, right? But the one thing that does frustrate me in this industry on the tech side, after that piece, because we have people that, no question, are in our community that don't have other options, so that is a foundation piece, and that's why we're public entities. Mm-hmm. But there are people, and I personally hate the term choice rider, because that makes it like cars are the choice, and we're secondary. We should be primary, and if you want to live a car-dependent life, I don't know why you would ever want to live that kind of life, that should be the alternative because you're living a worse life. So that's just the way I feel. I've been doing this. I haven't driven a car to work in like 20-some years. I don't know why anyone wastes their life doing that, but so be it. So the part that frustrates me though is, like, so I fly in here last night, right? WMATA is an amazing system. I don't know if Paul anyone's in the room. Great system, and rebuilding back the legacy. Why can I not use my system in Austin to come in and immediately use the system in DC? And that's our fault. That's not Uber and Lyft's fault. It's not Congress's fault. It's our fault as an industry that we become parochial and care about power and control. Uber and Lyft are mostly single riders doing a taxi with an app. And they've dominated not because they're this amazing service, and yeah, the tech has been good. They dominate because it's easy. It's frictionless experience because I can go to Beijing, Chicago, Austin, or Bogota, hit an app, and the same experience happens. Why is it that we have all these weird TVMs? You go to any place in America and watch 5 people go to someone else's TVM. They have no clue how to operate them, right? We do this to ourselves. And if we're going to actually move forward as true mobility as a service, it's great that we're doing stuff in our own communities. But we're a much connected world now, and people travel nonstop everywhere. And the fact that, you know, people go between Austin and Houston, and they can't use the same system, or WMATA can't use the same system as Baltimore, that is fundamentally an issue. And as an industry, this is the Industry Leadership Summit, we got to start addressing these things if we are going to actually worry about ridership and being competitive, and stop worrying about that's Congress or the FTA to fix that. That's for us to fix. So
Yeah.
anyway, I've been saying that for years, but I don't know what we made. I don't know what progress we made. I'm happy to take anyone else's app to work in our system if you guys.
And we can use our smart trip cards in DC and Baltimore, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. And
Progress.
their charm, yeah. Don was talking about, you know, these micro transit options and the zone, you know, they have a 5-mile radius, and we see that happening a lot. Sacramento, LA is going to start piloting, you know, some micro transit in their networks, and plenty of others, you know, across the country. And part of that, you know, as agencies, you know, are looking at these options, and I think one of the things, and you know, you can be corrected if I'm wrong, is you really need to know some of the origin and destination information within those zones, so you can create the right type of zone of where your customers need to go, and then hopefully if they're going outside that zone, you're connecting them to other parts of your network. But part of it is collecting data, and that's kind of where I want to move into the discussion. Is really the collection and analysis of data. And so, you know, there is a lot of data that's out there that it can be captured by different travelers, you know, information, you know, they're using the information from Google Maps that they get to, you know, own all of that. And really, there's a lot of ways. Anytime you plug in, you open your phone, someone's getting some data from you. And if it's, so they know, you know, where you are, where you're going, they know the demographics of who you are. They know, you know, what type of place you live in. You know, I think we'd be shocked at how much, you know, data is out there about ourselves that we're not really aware of. So when we really are talking about improving the user experience, and Marcus or Herb, I might direct this to you first, is what is some of the data that you think a transit agency needs or like to have in order to provide better service? And then also, you know, just kind of open up to the others as well, as from the agency side, what is the data that you would like as well? But I'm going to start with Marcus or Herb, just talking about the data that you know that's out there, and what should be available and what should we be looking at?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily that rocket science at all. I mean, what I think transit agencies have already let's say a plethora of data available anyway. I think where we can get better is, let's say, utilizing those data and maybe giving those right data back to, let's say, the riders. For instance, whether the bus or the train system is on time, whether this is a true accurate set of data and gets updated frequently, what I mentioned earlier before, or just if there is a detour, feeding that information back. And this always, I mean, the easiest way today is always doing that via those apps. To give those, let's say, information in real time, constantly to the rider, because then they see a value, right, in those data. If they know that their trip has just changed, or there is a service disruption, an unplanned service disruption, and which happens, and then the rider is informed. Or let's say if we give, let's say, these various options to riders in this more integrated fashion, that we, let's say, give those real data on what is, let's say, the travel time. If if you would use your car, although we don't want them to use the car, what is the, I think this type of information has already a big value to, so I don't think we need to gather additional data necessarily. What we do as a company, I mean, rather than only doing, let's say, trying to build a piece of software or a certain solution, I mean, we have data scientists, data engineers, because I know that for, let's say, because this is, I think, what also transit agencies may need in the future, and this is just also a matter of, let's say, capacity. Will these people be utilized every day? And this is why we have what we call a digital lab, where there's the data scientists, data engineers, and then we can take all type of data and work together with an agency in a co-creation process in order to, let's say, get a specific analytics tool or get a specific information in whatever way, either for internal processes or to inform the rider. I think this is how it's changing a bit from a traditional of we develop a product, or even from the way there is a problem and then we develop something. No, here is, let's say, here are the data scientists and data engineers, let's do it in a co-creation way.
Yeah, and I would, I like to think of the data that we need in tiers, right? I think of the basic tier as being the when and where, right? The basics of, where are you starting from, where are you going to? Obviously, we need to get that. We need to get it in a more robust way, though, than just, a home location, a work location, right? We need to understand the trip chaining that our customers make on any given day, so that we can understand that journey, right, that they take. Because that journey informs whether or not we can provide you with a single service that gets you back and forth between 2 points, or whether you need something that's more multi-destinational. So when and where, those are sort of some of the basics that we all know about, right? Take it a step further, of course, and then we want to know who, right? We want to know all of that demographic information that helps us inform everything from the rider's either level of income or level of means. That will tell us then again how robust of a service that they need, because they are a dependent rider who needs to use the service, or it'll help us understand a little bit more about are there other choices that need to be provided. Continue to extend that who into understanding their mobility needs, right? Our senior and disabled communities have different mobility needs, right? So just giving them fast frequent that says, well, now but you have to walk a quarter of a mile might not work out, right? So we need to understand those pieces. We need them to be able then, so that when we do all our trip planning and everything like that, and be able to reflect, hey, I need to take this trip. Google Trip Planner won't tell me, though, if that trip will be wheelchair accessible. It won't tell me if it has some of those keys. So we need to be able to continue to build the who into how we're building. And then if I took it one more tier, and this I think piggybacks on Allie, Tom, what you were talking about, what we talked about at lunch. To me, the highest evolution of what we need to know is why, right? At the end of the day, why are you traveling? We have to recognize that the services we're providing aren't a means to an end. Travel happens in space, but it happens because we need to get somewhere for some reason, right? Why are we traveling, and what's important about that? And understanding sort of that highest level of why people are using the services are the ways that then we can actually then design services that are reflective of what those customers need.
Jeff,
Yeah.
I just want to take a little different tact on this. So buses that are equipped with my technology and even my competitors' technology, we can gain up to 20,000 data points per half second. Nobody's using, I'll say, 5,000 of those 20,000 data points for any real productive information. So I don't think the answer is more data. I think there's a couple of things that are happening, and there's some changes in the way we have to do our business. And the first thing is that the data is there; it needs to be parsed. New York, Chicago, I think these are some of our customers that have the luxury of having enough people to have enough, or to have a department that can look at data and answer questions. As you start to go down the list a little bit, there's agencies that barely are having trouble making service. tons of data really doesn't have a whole lot of value to them. So then you start to say, okay, well, what if we take some artificial intelligence, right? And what if we start to put in artificial intelligence that tells me when a door is going to break, or when a route should be changed, so on and so forth. And I think we're not at that point yet where we can commercialize that to make decisions for us. So what I'm starting to see, we have a smaller agency on Long Island that's close to our office. It's called Nice Boss. And it's run by TransDev, and they've hired 3 data analysts, 3 very young, like, 22, 23-year-olds that love data, and they are all over the data. And they're matching those young folks with transit professionals who are all about the everyday problems. They know what the problems are, they're just not sure how to solve them. And when you match the people who can play with the data and the people who understand the problems, you start to get actionable results. So I think it was said yesterday, be careful what you ask for. Do we really need more data? Yeah, we definitely do for some things, but there's a lot of data we have that we're not currently using. One cool thing that I saw, we had a customer had a request from the DOT about their buses, and the request was, do they have accelerometers on them? And they said yes. Well, the DOT wanted a report back from the buses every time they hit a pothole, because then they were going to go out and fill the potholes. I thought that was kind of innovative, right, of use of data. We have it. Let's use it. Let's get a little innovative about it.
All right. Thanks, buddy. I want to make sure that you all feel free to join our conversation. I know I said this is my dinner chat with these folks, but come on and ask questions as you want, because I've got plenty more to ask, but I do want to make sure you get yours in as well. And looks like we've got someone right here.
Yeah. Doug Licato, Michigan Capital Area Transit Authority. I agree. There's too much data out there right now that's not being utilized, but we talked about standardizing. So for these smaller systems that don't have the data scientist, my day job is a network engineer. And so you talk about data. We have tons of data. We don't have the people to massage it, to sort of filter it out and deliver us, what some problems are. So I guess if we could standardize the method of capturing the data, and then possibly, data as a service using AI, that would help those systems that can't afford the data scientists that are on staff. Second, one thing that Adley brought up that sort of hits home to me is that transit is changing the demographics of people. And so ridership declining could be because the folks are no longer riding anymore because it's no longer useful to them. And that's one thing that a human being is going to do, is get creative if they need to be somewhere. They're not going to go and make a call to the transit agency and say, what happened to this route? They don't have time to do that, or they may not have a resource to do it, or they may not know how to articulate their message. So they're just going to find an alternative motive, riding with a friend, or, hey, hook me up, I'll pay you $2 next week, or whatever. So I think some of that might be lost as well, because transit is changing the demographics, and we just may not know it. We just sort of clarify it as loss of ridership, when we don't know who those riders really are. I hope that makes sense.
Well, I want to give a lesson learned on that too. Transit in Houston, when we did the bus redesign, what we learned is we weren't staying up where people were moving to. We weren't staying up where jobs were. So we were operating a system that really, if you go back to 1928 and looked at the streetcar system in Houston, that was basically our route structure. So the thing the board allowed us to do by a clean sheet of paper is be data driven. Go find out where people are living, where people are working, where people need to go to education, where people need to go to healthcare, and then design a high frequency system that gets them there. And then the other side is maximizing your investment in operating dollars. You know, there's kind of two aspects. You get a lot of ridership for areas that got density to do it. But there are people in coverage areas that need that service for their quality of life. So that's how you got to balance it all. But I'm not sure we always stay up as an agency of where people are working, living, playing, educating. So it's also a challenge back to us to stay up with that data and ask the right questions of where we need to go. And then I think we can get better service from there. So I think it's a kind of a two-way street as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And
can
then
I-
before I forget, it was Tom that talked about we as a transit agency just had the opportunity, and we just got it for to work with the Looking Bus application, and it's using the Bluetooth technology at every stop, and I just have a question about: is anybody concerned about smartphones and, you know, I'll just pick an iPhone, and whether or not they're going to continue to use Bluetooth as a technology going forward. And if they're not, then, you know.
I don't know the answer to that question, to be very upfront. What we've tried to do with our IT department, our Office of Innovation, is try to future-proof everything we're doing. But I think, as you all know, technology is changing so fast. About 18 months, you're getting a different variation of a technology enhancement. I think what we have to do is be open enough, and I'll get back to open architecture. The more we can plug and play, the better off we're going to be as an industry. Because the technology opportunities are there if we've got a platform to do that. So standardization is extremely important to us. But not being, no offense to any private sector operator, but we need an open architecture platform that the technology that best serves our community through the services we provide, we need to be able to implement as quickly as we can. So I think that's the challenge we all need to work together on as well.
I would agree.
Maybe I'll just add on that, and you're right, at the end of the day, the private sector has to deliver these tools, but the public sector, again, it's our responsibility because we do procurements. And we got to stop doing procurements that are about ourselves and do open architecture. So we got to, we got a new CEO coordinating council. Perfect opportunity for a bunch of CEOs to say, that's it, enough. And we're all going to have similar things in our open source procurement and enforce this issue. And we could solve that. We should, data standards. We can't even in this industry rate like what a trespasser strike is on a rail the same across agencies. That's ridiculous. But this is all stuff we can solve. We don't need an act of Congress. So we just as an industry got to get our pace a little cadence going here and realize we are at like a revolutionary, almost war footing with competitors and the change. And if we don't actually get a little faster as an industry, I really think we're in big, big trouble. And if we do it right, though, we have the growth potential in our industry is massive.
Yeah, I mean, back to the analogy, David made, it's not really his saying, but the walled garden. I mean, the walls are starting to be built, but, this is the opportunity now for us to make sure that it doesn't get built any higher and gets knocked down so that it is all open.
Yeah, and I want to bring in something at the end of the conversation because there's two things that need to be thought about. Bird Hill, San Francisco, Golden Gate Bridge District. I use transit. I don't drive a car. I use it in all ways. But two considerations I consider that we need to worry about is one is climate change, and the other is public health. We're getting more and more obese. We're not traveling through, and public health is directly related, of course, to livable streets in the decisions we make. And I think we need to have consideration of those. 2 weeks ago, the air quality in my neighborhood was 330 AQI. That's very dangerous. That affected my choices of transportation and how I traveled. A lot of cities are dealing with very bad air quality in what we're doing. The use of this big data is very important in considering those things when I do it. In San Francisco, excuse me, in San Francisco, I can make choices between my bicycle, and that's primarily the way I travel. Unfortunately, I just had a root cuff surgery, so I'm walking and using transit. But I can usually find that I can walk as fast, almost as quickly as I can, and that works well with my Fitbit and my health associated with it. So just in being so focused on transportation, that's getting there. but the transportation is part of the experience that we live in our lives. And I just want to make sure that we keep a track of that in our considerations.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, I got a comment.
Yeah.
One thing, and I'd love to explain, I don't know if you all have thoughts on this, but I think someone mentioned the me generation. I think it was you, buddy. I don't know if I go as that far because it almost sounds like it's all, I think you mean it from the on-demand style versus that it's selfishness. Because I actually think the next generation millennials, and I'm trying to hold on as long. I'm not a millennial, but I'm trying to act one like every day. I take scooters all the time too. So, but they're actually super focused on climate change. Very, very focused. And that's this battle between land use and all this other stuff going on. And you see new, modern, young urbanists and what the environmental movement used to be in a lot of these cities and how land use. But the thing that I'm interested in is related to an app and how we as an industry kind of get into the emotional, environmental aspects and sustainability from people's choice. So if you go to Whole Foods, right, and you walk in and you see seafood, I'm a vegetarian, but seafood, it's all rated on from sustainability. So you are making a cognizant decision a conscious decision of how I'm impacting the planet by my purchase. And does that affect everyone? Absolutely not. But it's going to become a bigger deal. So the things that I think are important are price, time, and how do we then start valuing environmental implication to someone's decision-making process. And on an app in the future, why can't we have it very clear that if you're going to take 10 minutes to this trip or 15, but it's this cost, but here's your carbon credit, if you will, versus that. And I think that next generation is much more ready to be influenced by those decisions, not owning individual cars, and being much more our customer base if we provide the visualization of their impact on those trips.
So you want to guilt them into
Not guilt. No. Make them conscious. Make them conscious of externalities, to be an economics term, of what their choice is.
Well, since we're talking about obesity, I'm going to sit up a little straighter. And then secondly, you're in Texas. You better start eating beef. What are you doing?
Vegetarian in the high-rise taking a bus. Throw me out of the state.
I'd add to the previous question a couple of things. One, I do think looking at the broad spectrum of ways to move around is important. But it goes back to something Marcus said earlier. On the private sector side, they're driven by making a profit. On the public sector side, we're driven by ridership. And the reality is, if we don't get credit for people riding bikes and people choosing to walk instead of driving their own car, as well as instead of riding transit, we'll talk about it in this kumbaya setting about how great it is to have scooters and bike share and more people walking. But in reality, when people go back and they look at how their funding is coming, it's not a kumbaya moment. So again, back to what I said earlier, we need to really start having conversations that are grounded in us really moving forward. And the reality is people are going to continue to drive. The transit mode split in most cities is less than like 10%, right? Some cities are maybe up to 50%, but that's the vast minority, not majority. So if, again, we constantly focus on being transit providers and not mobility managers, we get in this conversation that's great for us, but it's not great for anybody else who's outside in the real world. You can go into any corridor during a rush hour period, and there's lots of cars with people by themselves in their car. Even in cities where the transit ridership is up, there's still lots of people in Houston driving their car by themselves during the peak period. So the reality is you can design all sorts of bus systems and networks. They still have to ride in the same corridors with the same cars and the same congestion. And that's still our real struggle. So the question is, in order to really manage the network and manage the system and understand the data, we need to look at it comprehensively. We need to be saying that it is our job to manage all mobility, not just transit, because that's how we can really make an impactful change on how people move. Then we can control how much it costs for you to drive your car by yourself. We can be a part of how much do we charge for parking. We can be a part of when do you get out of your car and then use transit because it's too congested, and then we'll dynamically, using clever devices if you want, we'll dynamically shift you through another corridor that doesn't have as much congestion. It might not be the most straightforward route, but it'll get you there faster than staying in that traffic. That's the space that we need to occupy by utilizing data and technology and understanding how the public sector drives and moves their organizations forward. It might not be because of profit, but we still have mechanisms that we are held to in order for us to continue to get funding. So I just say, again, we need to open our minds about what we are actually here to do and change the conversation and own the process, the entire process. We need to work to own it and not just have the small little piece carved out that's called transit.
Yeah.
And I want to build off of that because the foundation piece is, and we've learned it very clearly, if people cannot get to transit, they will not use transit.
Right.
So sidewalk connectivity, accessibility to transit is critical. And I think we've got to work with all of our regional partners to make sure that that's available to everybody as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm not going to be able to get to it, but I wish we could talk more about our relationships with our local partners, the DOTs and the cities. But we have time for one more question, and so I'm going to give to Michael and let him.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. I was hearing Randy talk about system fragmentation across fare payments and wayfinding and things of that nature. And I agree fully with the idea that we should be harmonizing systems and making it easier for people to use the systems that we've got across, counties and cities and what have you. But I do worry that we don't have the ability to act quickly enough. Uber and Lyft are already working toward integrating systems through their apps. You can look at Lyft and what they're doing in Santa Monica in terms of integrating between Lyft service and their bus lines there. Uber is moving forward with integration with Masabi, with the idea that they can serve as that kind of one-stop shop for transportation, and that will be that unified system that you were talking about across cities. And so what role do those companies play from your perspective? And this is a question for the entire panel. Because they're here today and they're likely to be moving in the next 6 months to 12 months to deliver exactly what you're speaking about that may take years for we in the public sector to actually come up with.
Well, to my point of view is there's no pride of, I think we should get away from pride of authorship. So like Cap Metro doesn't need our own app. I don't mean that as in we need necessarily a public entity to have a one, kind of more open system. It's more the open architecture I think that's important, and the cream of the crop will rise up. And if that's someone like that could be on this panel to an Uber and Lyft, I don't think Uber and Lyft will even exist in 5-10 years. GM and Uber might form a new company. We're going to have fleets of private autonomous vehicles and no longer manufacturing companies with these kind of partnership mobility providers. And if someone can do all of that and make this, at the end of the day, I don't care how many buses I operate. I don't care how many employees I have. My job is to actually make mobility in Austin better. So, our business is set up to be an NTD. I have this ridership. I have this many buses. I have this many employees. It's all that kind of based. Our job as public employees is to make a better community. And so if I can get a private partner that delivers that interface better, and I still can reconcile the financials in the back end in an open, transparent way and control fare policy in an equitable, Title VI based way, I'm open to deal with anyone. And maybe I'm way too bold and kind of naive on some of the stuff I'm missing, but I think that's the way we got to be looking at this and get away from we need to present to me I learned this, I guess, where we had some kind of creative people when I worked at the MBTA that came in when we had a lot of issues. And the challenge from them was stop defining the solutions, better define the problems and the outcomes you're after, and let other people figure out the solutions for you. You're a transit agency, you can't know everything. Put out the problem, get people to help bring you solutions. And so I've been trying to do that ever since that person got in my head that way. So I don't know if that makes sense to
And
other
I
people.
actually agree with Randy, but I think we do have a pushback on those providers. That equity of service is for everybody that needs the service. And we shouldn't be hesitant to say, if you can't provide it to everybody within reasonable standards, we ought to be anti to what they're up to.
That's right.
And not push back.
Yeah,
Or not let them push us back. We push back.
that's right.
Fundamentally, it's all about serving the community. All people in the community.
And there's maybe just one, I would also say an Uber and a Lyft and those type of companies will probably not, let's say, they will never have the same vision what you have, right? What Randy just mentioned, right? They don't. But they have they are open to incentives because they're a private sector company. I mean, if they want to serve the airports, they want to serve the downtown areas, they want to, let's say, have good riderships. Giving, let's say, maybe there is a bit of a win-win scenario which can be created if they would be committed to serve areas which are currently underserved, which is difficult for you to, let's say, provide, let's say, additional services. And then, let's say, there is a certain access, for instance, to an airport or to a specific area. I think with those type of, because ultimately it is difficult to have regulations in place on what they do or not do. But as much as there is let's say, all these changes we are discussing are related to technology, I think the biggest part is also related to the business model changes we are seeing, which affects all of us. And there are also, let's say, areas which we can, because the good thing is, and also what Wendy said, there is a time right now where this can be changed, right? I mean, it's not everything set in stone. And there are people out there, I mean, we are a technology company, we are focusing on the technology part rather than on the operational part, but everybody's, let's say, trying to move into their space and trying to make those change happen, everybody's envision. So I like the discussion we have actually very much on how can this be more. This is all of that. I mean, also as a company, I mean, we built the first, let's say, underground system in 1896, and today a company like Siemens would not, let's say, exist if you're not talking about open APIs, open backend data integration. If we would not think about that, if we would be adamant of saying you need to use, I mean, as Bytemark, we have great apps. I mean, of course, we need to integrate with all the other, let's say, providers which are there, because otherwise we will, let's say, we will not add value. And ultimately, this is what we all need to do in order to be successful in that changing environment.
But what you're getting to is, I mean, private industry will always be able to innovate at a faster pace than the public side. And that's okay. Use that and leverage that. But the public has to protect the public interest, right? And that is the mission and that's the goal. So the public agencies, and again, this is everything we've been saying, live your mission, define the mobility framework. Say, this is the sandbox, this is how you play in the sandbox. Mm-hmm. And the Lyfts and Ubers or whatever it is, in 10 years, right? They provide specific defined services. But guess what? At the end of the day, they're not moving 40, 50 people at a time, right? So nothing's going to replace that. So define the mobility framework, to define what the backbone of that system is. And and let private spend all the VC money in the world to develop the next innovation that then we can use to improve mobility for everybody.
Well, I hate to close out this conversation, but we are out of time. And I really do appreciate all of the panelists, so let's give them a big hand. I think we really did have a good conversation to really talk about and really think about the user and the rider as we move forward in a lot of different aspects. So it's, again, as we started, it's just thinking about the rider from just the basics of what kind of service they need, all the way up through using these different technologies that are available.